Have a great time all. I'm happy and deem this my honor introducing the speaker of this fourth session today, Dr. Deepesh Chandrasekharan. Dr. Deepesh Chandrasekharan currently teaches English at Shiv Nadar University, Chennai. His PhD is from IFLU, Hyderabad, and his research interests have centered around issues of language and power, including multilingualism, critical pedagogy, language policy, and teaching in disadvantaged contexts. He has several good publications and has been training teachers in schools and colleges for over 10 years. Kindly proceed with your session on reading in relation to other skills, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Indusudhan. Good evening to all. I can see that the numbers are swinging between 90 and 110. I mean, I don't know. I should blame it on the internet or on the time of the day or on the fact that it's at the end of a long list of sessions and so on and so forth. But anyway, I deem it an honor and a privilege to be able to present to you my views on the topic given to me, reading in relation to other skills. I see that there is already some chat about skills. So what I want to do is I want to quickly run a poll on the word skills in this title. It's a very, very basic poll, but I just want to see if it works. Let's see if it works. I'm just publishing a question with 2 options. You just have to choose the correct option. Let's see if it works. Yeah. Are you able to see the poll? Yeah. Okay. I get a sense of the opinion of the audience. It's almost like in Indian elections, right? Now it's becoming like the elections in Tamil Nadu. So it's either swinging to one side or to the other side. So yeah, it is 72 and 27% now. 27% of the people who voted in this poll say that by the word skills in this title, we mean listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So when you say reading in relation to other skills, we mean reading in relation to listening, reading in relation to speaking, and reading in relation to writing. 75% now, almost 76% of you think it's okay. Still, it's running in favor of the second option. Okay, life skills, critical thinking skills, communication skills, could be any set of skills that we are referring to when we say reading in relation to other skills. So this is your opinion. Well, the title might be misleading in that sense, but here it's reference to language skills. So obviously the first option, which is listening, speaking, and writing, that is what was intended. I have now 27% saying listening, speaking, and writing, and 72% saying much broader things, life skills, critical thinking, communication skills in broad, in general, and so on, right? I'm ending the poll I just wanted to get a hang of how it works. So there. The question is reading in relation to other skills. There was another session, I believe, a few days ago where this topic was dealt with. I've been asked to do this within an hour. It's a tough task because there's a lot of research with respect to reading and how it has an effect on listening, speaking, and writing. right? I'm going to touch upon, of course, I'm going to touch upon critical thinking or life skills in general and communication aspects in general. But my focus is going to be on the three other language skills, which are L, S, and W, right? Okay, my name is Deepesh. I teach at the Shivanada University in Chennai, which has begun its operations this year. Yeah. So I'm going to start off by talking about reading itself. I mean, I know your whole FDP is based on reading, and you've almost become experts yourselves in reading. But I'll still take you through quickly the broader benefits of reading in general, right? So we've heard, I'm sure over the few days, over the past few days, you've heard a lot of talk about why we should encourage reading and what is so crucial about reading and so on. Yet I'll go with that as well, because that should be the base on which we build our building, right? So first and foremost, that it exercises the mind. It engages various parts of the brain. That depends on the varied and broad nature of your reading habit will engage various parts of your brain. It exercises comprehension. It helps you develop your analytical abilities. It fires your imagination. The memory centers of the brain are activated, and even emotionally, it helps people get more stabilized when you're a habitual reader. In terms of identity, in terms of who you are as a person, in terms of what aspects of you as a person or a personality are important, or who you are in terms of the facets that people can have, reading helps you explore that. It introduces you to new worlds, of course. It broadens perspectives. It gives you an idea that, oh, there's another way of thinking about this, or another way of looking at this, instead of the straitjacketed way in which you've been thinking all along, and so on, right? Empathy. This word will occur a couple of times more because I can't emphasize this enough. It creates empathy for others. Put yourself, because when you read, you're actually reading. When you're reading anything, you're putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. If it's a novel or fiction, you are obviously reading, you're thinking from the narrator's point of view or the protagonist's point of view. But even if you're reading non-fiction, if you're reading history, you're reading anything, you are reading from somebody's perspective, somebody's standpoint. And in that sense, you're always putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. You might agree, you might disagree, but you are still putting yourself in somebody's shoes, right? Like I told you about perspectives, it triggers new ways of thinking about life. So you can zoom out a lot when you read often. If you don't read much, you get cocooned into a corner of life. You zoom in too much on life, on the here and now. You don't get a broader perspective of life. You don't zoom out, right? So I use this metaphor very often. When we use Google Maps, for example, we get stuck in some street, in some cul-de-sac, but oftentimes every now and then actually we need to zoom out to get a new perspective on life and say, okay, this in the broader perspective, this is where I'm heading, this is my broader direction, this is the highway I need to take. Let me not get stuck with this by lane, right? So new ways of thinking about life is one of the major aspects of reading. Helps shape your identity. Who are you as a person? Like I told you sometime back, the facets of personality that appeal to you. What are your interests? What are the things that trigger joy in you, right? What are the aspects of your background that are important for you? Those aspects of identity are shaped or underscored by the reading that you do. It helps to inspires you to learn from others. So it's not only looking at the way you had always been thinking about life. You get new perspectives, and you get the opportunity to learn from others. So vicarious learning. So you don't have to experience something yourself. When you read somebody else's experience, you can learn from others' experience, right? So the learning from others in that sense is immense when you read. Needless to say, it's extensive reading, especially when you're reading a novel or reading for pleasure. It relaxes, motivates yourself, cheers you up when the chips are down, when your life is morose, when it's boring, when you're cooped up during the lockdown, and there is a lot of pessimism and so on. You can find reading motivating. It gives you company when you're alone. If you're not feeling sleepy, you want to fall asleep, it can help you do that. It relaxes your mind and the body, just like yoga, people say. It recharges your energy, people say, and we've all experienced it. It also helps you improve your focus and attention. So in this time when you're bombarded with, not only you, all our students as well, we're bombarded with information, and the attention span of the people is reducing. You can hardly hold people's attention. In this era, in these times when there is a crisis of attention, or there are so many things competing for your attention, it's an important habit to continue focus on a particular aspect. That reading trains you to do that. So it helps you enhance your focus, increases your attention span. So you're able to steadily go on with a certain activity without getting distracted by something else, right? So blocks out noise and distractions when you're reading, right? So these are the broad spin-offs from reading. But I'm bringing you to my portion of the topic, which is how does reading help you in your skills, language skills? Your meaning, I'm not referring to you necessarily, but to our students as well, right? So why is it that reading is recommended as something which scaffolds, or something which supports, or something which enhances your other skills, right? So that's what I'm going to focus on. There are three ways in which I'm going to look at it. One is receptive versus productive skills. So the two skills which are receptive skills are reading and listening. Productive skills are writing and speaking. That's one. Two is to look at communicative skills itself. People use oral skills as communication skills, and how reading has an effect on that in a broad way. And thirdly, I'll move to the specific three skills itself, right? So how does reading relate to the two receptive skills, which are reading itself and listening? Reading itself, we all know intuitively that the more you read, it helps you read better. So you can't learn to read by not reading. You can't learn to read by merely listening to something, or by merely watching something, right? So the more you read, the better you become as a better reader that you become, right? So receptive skills in terms of reading, of course, but also in terms of listening. How does it relate? It improves your ability to recall descriptions, facts, and details. So you're reading a novel, there are details, you have to keep those details in mind as you go along. You have to make those connections. Why is this person was mentioned in a couple of chapters ago, and this person has appeared here now? What is the connection? You need to recall how a person was, or a place was, or a thing was described. What are the facts about those places or things or people that were mentioned, and what are the details? You need to recall those. You need to fire those cells in your brain, to go as you go along when you read. The same thing when you listen, right? So you're listening to a story, you're listening to a talk, whether it's academic or non-academic, you're listening to something, a longish text, that is. You need to recall the descriptions, the facts, the details as you go along, right? So in that sense, both reading and listening are deeply connected. There is a sense of the same path or the same route that you're taking in both contexts, right? It also enhances your ability to guess meanings of new words and phrases. So the earliest stages of reading to the most advanced, people like Shashi Tharoor, who seem to have a vast bank of vocabulary, even the most agile, most adept reader they are trying to all the time guess new meanings of new words. So not only are you acquiring new words, you're also not having to look up the dictionary each time you come across a new word, because from the context you can sort of guess what the meanings are, right? So guessing the meanings of new words, guessing the meaning of new phrases, and as continuum, understanding new idioms or stock phrases, fixed expressions, things which you not come across earlier, or things which you come across earlier but are used in a new context creatively, for example. All those aspects, reading and listening, follow the same path, right? So when you're listening to a text or when you're reading a text, all the time your mind is processing the input, and you're trying to make sense of it. And if the input is has new words or new phrases or new idioms or fixed expressions and stock phrases and so on, you're recalibrating your understanding of what it involves, right? It helps gain ability to draw inferences by piecing together details of the given text. So I just told you, when you're reading or when you're listening, there are details which add up, right? So you probably have, it might be incremental, that is, you have some detail, then a little more. It might be incremental. It might be circular. So there's a detail in some chapter, and then after some time you get more details about that. So you have to connect with what details were already there and add up to that. So in that sense, you piece together the details that are given, whether it's a written text where you're reading, or it's an audio text where you're listening even when you're watching something, right? So in that sense, both the receptive skills, that are reading and listening, they follow the same path. Going further, going higher up, you identify the main points and the supporting details, and therefore you are able to have an overview. You're able to sort of give a summary or the crux of what you've read or what you've heard, right? So if you're listening to something and somebody asks you, what did they say? If you are able to say verbatim, this is what was said, that is one type of skill. But if you're able to rephrase or paraphrase what was said and say it in a few words, that's an amazing skill, right? So in terms of skills, in terms of receptive skills, both reading and listening, you need to identify the main points and cut the flab and say, okay, these are all supporting details which may not be crucial. If I have to summarize this, or if I have to say to someone, what is the bottom line, or what is the crux, what is the essence of what was written or what was said, right? Going beyond that, to connect what we discussed about critical thinking and so on, you have the ability as a good reader, an advanced level reader, as well as an advanced level listener. You have the ability to evaluate whether this writer or the speaker's ideas or point of view is valid or it's hocus pocus, right? Is this point of view backed by evidence, or is just opinion, which is just imagination? Is there some credibility to it? Is there something backed by evidence, right? And also, of course, how relevant is it to the context? How relevant is it to you as a reader or as a listener, and so on? Those aspects, of those evaluative aspects, those aspects where you go beyond the ordinary, are also important things when you're a reader or a listener. So these are something to do with the receptive skills, right? Let's move to the productive skills. Now, how does reading relate to writing? Of course, we know reading relates to writing. And how does reading relate to speaking? Yeah, that's where we need to touch upon this. Improving your expressive or productive skills is also a spin-off from reading, right? How? It improves your writing or your speaking style and flow. So you don't write in a vacuum, you don't speak in a vacuum. There is a certain element of content, and also how you're going to present this content. It is based on something which is already written or already spoken, right? So in many ways, you have something which is already there, and you're bringing something from your own background, your own schemata. You're bringing something to it. you're processing it and developing your own style, right? So you develop your own style as a writer or as a reader, and you organize your ideas in both your written text as well as your spoken text, spoken discourse. You do that on the basis of your reading. I mean, not completely, but reading does have an effect on that, right? Your speaking craft, your writing craft is based on others' skills. So both in speaking and writing, but especially when you read, you also get, oh, this is a nice way of putting it. Let me try this kind of craft, right? So your craft is honed by somebody else's writing when you read. Improve your writing or speaking skills by strengthening your vocabulary. Obviously, you learn new words, you learn new expressions, idioms, you learn new ways of saying something. You develop expressions which you have never heard before, but you sort of learn to take those liberties. You know, those kinds of things happen based on your own reading. It doesn't happen to somebody who's not read anything. It doesn't happen to somebody who does not know the usual, right? So sharpening or strengthening vocabulary is not merely picking up Tharurisms, learning words or expressions that Tharoor uses, Shashi Tharoor uses, for example, right? So vocabulary is much more than that. Learning how to negotiate, how to chisel the existing words and expressions, how to yoke two different kinds of words, or all those aspects come into strengthening your vocabulary. Sharpening your sentence structures and language. So not only at the word level, the vocabulary level, but also at the level in which you move to forming clauses or sentences. Even at that level, you learn to use those tricks, you learn to use the variety, you learn to take liberties. You do all that on the basis of the reading that you have done. So when we teach reading, it is not only teaching them reading to become good readers, but we are also, I mean, the underlying statement I'm making, the overall overarching conclusions that I'm drawing from this is, or I want you to draw from this is, that reading has its effect on all the other skills as well, right? Of course, we discussed about fresh perspectives. When you gain new perspectives, you also become more confident, both as a speaker and as a writer, especially as a speaker, right? So if as a speaker you think, oh my God, I don't know, I'm not sure if I have it in me, or if I think my ideas are valid, or if I think, oh, I'm not sure if what I'm saying is going to come across as something which makes sense, you gain a certain confidence, because there are various perspectives. I may not be, I mean, nobody is perfectly correct all the time, and those kinds of perspectives that you gain from a wide reading, it adds to the confidence that you have as a speaker and as a writer. I told you I'm going to first look at receptive and productive skills. Then I'm going to move to what is commonly called communication skills, of course, with reference to listening and speaking. And then I'll move to the individual 3 skills. Then we'll wind up. Yeah. 1, enhances our content, right? So in terms of listening and speaking, how does reading add to us or our abilities as a listener or as a good speaker, right? Obviously, it gives us the content, right? It gives us the weapons that we need at the war, right? It gives us all the material, right? Information is supreme, and reading is one of the best sources of continuous learning, knowledge gathering and idea sharing. So if you want to gain knowledge, you can't simply go and sit in the Himalayas and meditate and knowledge will strike you. These days it doesn't. You need to look up and you need to read, right? So even if you're doing it on Google, even if you're doing it on Google Scholar, you are reading, you have to read, right? So the sources of continuous learning, the source of knowledge, the sources of even discussion, in many ways, it all boils down to reading, right? So in many ways, the content that you need to listen and speak can be derived from a lot of reading. Because by reading, you're actually roaming around the world. there's no geographical boundary when you're reading. You can, there's no inhibition of time. You can read about things in the past, you can read about the future, both in terms of fiction as well as in terms of science. And it also gives us deeper and broader perspectives of ideas. So instead of straight-jacketed, instead of conventional cliche ways of thinking, we can think of fresh ways of thinking, fresh perspectives, fresh spins to existing contexts, and so on and so forth, right? And perspectives, ideas, concepts, practices, emotions, events, everything broader, deeper perspective reading gives us, right? Opens our mind to new choices. So the most liberal, the most outward thinking, the most flexible, nimble minds are those which are constantly affected by reading, constantly evolved, which constantly evolve through reading, right? So new choices, situations, opinions, we can open our minds to that when we read, right? So that's the first thing. So it enhances our content, the way in which we can think. What is the material? What are the ideas? The first prerequisite for speaking is you need to have something to speak, right? So the content itself, reading gives us a lot of that. That's the point, right? Second, I told you this before, and I told you the word empathy is going to repeat in my presentation. I'm saying performance. Yeah, it helps build empathy, right? I can't emphasize this enough. As a teacher, not only as a teacher of English or a teacher of language, but as teachers, what we need to do in this world is to help build empathy. So reading is highly recommended for our students because it helps them put themselves in others' shoes. Most important thing to do today, because in our sitting in our cocoons, we tend to shut out, we tend to isolate ourselves from other ways of doing things, other people's situations, other people's considerations, other people's opinions. We sit in our echo chambers on social media, everywhere. We sit in our echo chambers and say, yeah, this is the only way of thinking about it. This is the correct way of thinking about it. My way is the highway. That kind of stuff. So reading, especially when you go beyond the ordinary, it helps build empathy. That's very, very important. As a speaker, as a listener, I think we need, apart from content, we also need empathy. To know your audience, you need to know who you're speaking to, what kind of people these are, what are their aspirations, what am I saying, does that appeal to these people, and so on and so forth. For that, it's crucial to have empathy. Reading about other people helps us understand them better. The people you're reading about, as well as the audience when you're speaking to somebody. So reading about something stimulates the same neurological regions of the brain as when we experience it. So it's not as if we need to know that, oh, when I put my finger into a plug, a live plug, electrical socket, I get a shock. So I don't have to experience it necessarily. If I read about it, I might be cautious enough, right? So there's ample research suggests that the same regions, the neurological regions of the brain, are activated when we experience something, when we read something as well. So because you're putting yourself in the person's shoes, the character's shoes, or the protagonist's shoes, or the person who's described, that person's shoes. So that empathy stimulates the same neurological regions as you experience it yourself. Reading gives the brain more time to stop, to think, to process, to imagine, right? Like our famous man said, stop and stare. We need to reflect in this rat race. As teachers of English, I think we need to heavily emphasize this aspect, that we need to stop and reflect. That's very, very important. In that sense, creating empathy is crucial. Putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, getting inside their heads, experiencing the things that they have experienced, right? So even as a speaker, even if it's not to a large audience, even if it is to 1 or 2 people, you need to think about, okay, what is it that's going on in their mind? What is the situation in their life, and so on and so forth, right? So experiencing the things that they have, reading gives that that framework, that background that we need to become a good speaker, good listener as well. The more we understand someone, the more we can tailor our communications to what they need, right? So that's in that sense, reading helps us build content for what to speak, helps us connect better with the people we are speaking to, in the sense that it helps us build the empathy that is required as a speaker. Spin-off, we already just discussed vocabulary. The more we read, the more we come across new words, idioms, stock phrases, different registers. Registers, I think we didn't discuss that, but I think that's also an aspect. Depending on the profession that you're dealing with, the register differs, and then that gives us enough grounding, enough clues for us to use as a speaker or as a listener as well, right? So the kinds of language, the variety of language, or the slant of language that each profession or each class, each category, each identity use, for example, those things we become more familiar with that as well. So when you're talking about vocabulary, it's not only words and phrases, also registers the way in which language is used and so on, right? So to communicate with particular sectors, industries, understanding the domain-specific language is essential. I mean, it's an industrial, corporate kind of a thing, or is it a law-based thing? Is it a humanities thing? Is it a social science thing? You know, those kinds of things. Yeah. Strengthens the brain. We already discussed this. Reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body. So, like you do yoga and walking and all that to keep yourself fit, you need to read to jog your mind, right? So as we read, our brain decodes abstract symbols, makes connections, conducts various visual and auditory processes. Multiple studies suggest that mentally challenging tasks such as reading help to maintain and build brain cells and connections. So all your Alzheimer's, your age-related, brain-related conditions, they will all get postponed if you read regularly, right? Read not only one kind of stuff, read a variety of things with considerable depth, helping to preserve memory and thinking skills. So in that sense, you can postpone your aging, you can postpone your forgetfulness, you can postpone your possibilities of getting Alzheimer's and so on and so forth, right? Yeah. Reading can give us the ability to persuade, argue, and deliberate. So one of the aspects of speaking, one of the aspects of what you need to do as a speaker is to negotiate, is to constantly Bakhtin's centrifugal forces, right? So you are all the time trying to negotiate, not necessarily in a crass war kind of a thing, but you're all the time trying to fine tune your way of thinking and try and bring it in sync with the thinking of the others, right? So it's the same with opinions, the same with ideas, the same with perspectives, right? So at all the time, your constant friction is a very violent word, but I think just for want of a better word, I'm using that word. You're all the time, your ideas are in friction with others' ideas, right? So that constant give and take, the constant deliberation, that constant negotiation is a good word, I think. That happens better when you are an adept reader, right? So when you're reading various points of view, and you're coming to an opinion based on all that. There is a considered opinion. It's not an opinion just you whim and you picked up that opinion. No, you've deliberated it, or you've thought about it, you've pondered over it, you've had a churning in your mind, right? So when you do that, when you're discussing with somebody, when you're deliberating with somebody, when you're arguing with somebody, when you're trying to persuade somebody, these skills that you picked up when you read widely, they'll help you a lot, right? That's the point. So the more we read, the more our brains can link cause and effect. So why did this happen? it happened because of this. So if you can identify what led to what, then you can identify what will lead to what as well, right? So you can sort of predict, you can sort of convince people that this is what is going to happen if you do this, because you already read about, you read about some effect, and you can link it to a cause that led to that effect, right? The ability to communicate cause and effect is a central component of any argument. Sales pitch, negotiation, even a story. If you're writing a story, you need to convince your reader that this is what is going to happen based on these sequence of events and so on and so forth, right? So sometimes you leave a film hall after watching a film, say, oh, well, I'm not convinced with this one because suddenly something happened. There's no basis for it. That's because the cause and effect didn't work, right? So as a good reader will always think about a veritable, possible, plausible plot based on a plausible cause and effect. As such, a well-written article, book, as well as good speech is structured in a way that helps us to think in a sequence rather than jumping from point to point. So all that ability to build an argument, an ability to convince the reader or the listener is made better using reading, right? So the point I'm making about communication skills is that reading helps us become better listener and speaker. That's the point, right? Yeah, that is counterintuitive, because we always think of children learning to listen and speak first, and then learn to read and write. Yeah, of course. That's why I put the last point there. Initially, reading and writing are dependent on oral skills. Needless to say, right? Of course, the only exceptions are those who can't, but I'm just talking about those who can, right? So oral skills, listening and speaking, always precede reading and writing. You don't have to teach listening and speaking. They will automatically be learned, but you need to teach reading and writing. So in that sense, they are very different. We know that. It's intuitive. But eventually, this is counterintuitive. They sharpen, that is the reading and writing ability, sharpen the oral skills, right? So you learn to listen and speak, and then you learn to read and write. But what you read and write helps us become better listeners and speakers. So that's the point we are making here, right? Young children learn to read using their oral skills. Older children, not even adults, older children even, widen and deepen their learning, their horizons, and of course, therefore, their ability to speak based on reading. That's the point I'm making, right? Yeah, so now I'll quickly go through the individual three skills, that is writing, speaking, and listening. Writing. What's the similarity between reading and writing? Both are meaning-making processes. Both use similar patterns of thinking, of course, obviously. They have similar linguistic habits for reading and writing. Individual experiences, schema, right? That we know now, we don't think of students as empty slates, empty tabula rasa. We think of students as coming to our classrooms with their own knowledges, their own schema, their own background knowledge about life, about language itself, about languages. In fact, they come to our classrooms with knowledge of several languages. So their individual experiences, both in terms of language and content, do help them become better writers. So when you're reading, you're using a certain schema. When you're writing, you're using a certain schema, right? So at all times, what you read is different. I mean, even if two different people read the same text, it is not the same comprehension or the same knowledge that they gain from that reading. Why? Because their schema is different. My background knowledge is different from your background knowledge. So the way in which you read it, or what you read from the text, will be slightly different from what I read from the text, even if the writer intended it to be in a certain way, right? So the output I'm saying, what you gain from the reading, that will be totally different based on the schema of the reader, the person who's reading, that person's background knowledge in both terms of content, life experiences, as well as in terms of their linguistic bank, right? So in both terms, what schema they bring to the reading helps them, shapes the way in which they read something. And of course, this is true even when somebody is writing something, right? Critical thinking and evaluation, crucial aspects when we're dealing with both reading and writing. So what is the suggestion? The suggestion is we read like writers. We need to read like writers. Fantastic idea, right? So how does a writer read? The writer reads assuming, okay, I'm going to write something based on this. So I read, oh, how? So you go meta, right? Going meta, I'm sorry, I'm using an informal expression, but going meta is to think about the way in which something is happening, right? So when you read as a writer, like a writer, you think, oh, how is this sentence formed? How is this structure used? How is this group of words woven together, right? So you read like a writer, you zoom out, you pay attention to the form, you pay attention to how this thing is happening, right? You go meta, that's what I mean by that, right? And you write like readers. So when you write it, okay, how is my reader going to read this? Okay, this is how I want them to read. So I write in that sense. So it is suggested that, I mean, when you want to become a good reader and good writer, it's suggested that you read like a writer and you write like a reader. So when you read like a writer, you're paying attention to the form in which reading text is written. So okay, this is the turn of phrase, this is the thing that is done, right? So you pay attention to how it's written. And when you write like a reader, you write in such a way that you're keeping in mind, okay, how is my reader going to perceive this? How is my reader, what conclusions are my reader going to make? How am I going to make my reader read in a particular way, right? So you write like a reader and you read like a writer. So writing and reading are interconnected. So you want to become a better writer, better be a good reader, right? So you can't be an accomplished writer without having read much. There might be some splendid exceptions, but we're talking about the rule, not about the exception, right? Yeah. Reading and speaking, I mean, we discussed this in the previous context when we talked about communication skills. Both involve the use of rich and varied vocabulary. So the more rich and varied your vocabulary is when you're reading, the more likely that you would use rich and varied vocabulary when you're speaking. The more variety there is in the language structures used in your reading, the more chances of a variety of language structures being used when you're speaking. I'm not suggesting that you speak in the way in which it's written when you read, but I'm just saying that the variety is, the chances of using a variety are more when you're a good reader. In that sense, the use of diverse content to suit the context. So depending on the certain context, you write in a certain way and you read that and you make conclusions like that. In the same way as a speaker, when you have to speak to somebody or in any context, you determine what to speak, how to shape what you're speaking, depending on the context that is there, right? So in that sense, you use this diverse content to suit the context, just like as a reader you read in a certain way, right? And capture the imagination of the speaker, of the listener when you're speaking, just like the writer captures the imagination of the reader when they write. So reading and speaking are connected. Reading and listening, I told you, counterintuitive. You would think that listening listening precedes reading. And there are many people who actually suggest that, those who find reading texts very difficult, they simply listen to an audio text, and that enhances their ability to read. So, when you listen to a text, you probably it becomes easier for the person. It scaffolds in a way the reading of written text, possibly, but this is I'm placing it on its head. It's the other way around. Both involve receiving information and processing it. Both are receptive skills. We discussed this before. Both use schemata. So you have a certain idea of the world, knowledge of the world, and you have certain knowledge of language. That is your schema, and based on that, you read in a certain way. You listen in a certain way. So depending on whether the text is a listening text or a reading text, it is always negotiated with the schema that you bring to the text, right? So in that sense, both listening and reading are similar. Critical thinking and evaluation, we just discussed. The more adept, the more skillful you are as a reader or as a listener, the more your ability, the greater your ability to think critically and say, okay, this is what this writer is trying to say. This writer is trying to influence me to think in a certain way by using this trick of a phrase, this tricky language, and so on and so forth, right? So the ideas of how the writer is persuading you to do something, how the speaker is persuading you to do something, those critical thinking abilities, those abilities to evaluate, is this person's argument credible? Is there evidence in what this person is writing or saying? Both are connected, right? So in that sense, you become a better listener by being a great reader, right? So reading has its effect on listening, is what I'm arguing. Listening usually, and these are all not my argument, these are based on my own reading, and I'm going to give you the references as well. Yeah, listening usually feeds into the development of early reading skills. We just discussed that, but reading feeds into the sharpening of one's listening skills later. So listening precedes reading. It helps people become better readers, especially in the beginning stages. But then once you become a good reader, the reading that you do feeds into how great a listener you are, right? So your reading enhances your listening abilities is the argument I'm making, right? So in that sense, reading in relation to other skills, reading helps in writing, reading helps you become a better listener, and reading also helps you become a better speaker, right? That's the point I'm making. These are the references I have. I mean, I think the slides are share worthy. You can even take a snapshot. Those are my my details. If I have not overshot time, I think we have enough time for questions, if any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have a couple of questions from the audience.
Oh, now I see the 149. Wow, that's nice. That's a nice number. Yeah.
So we have a question from Vishnu Nune. What methods would you suggest to strengthen the reading skills among non-English medium school children?
Yeah, see, I'm glad you've, Vishnu Nune, I'm glad you've raised this question from non-English medium school children. And now, see, there is ample evidence, Jim Cummins onwards, like lots and lots of people who have worked in bilingualism, who have argued that there is a common underlying proficiency, right? So it's not as if you read Marathi in a certain way, if Marathi is your L1, you read Tamil in a certain way, if Tamil is your L1, you read Malayalam in a certain way, if Malayalam is your L1, and so on. You read all languages in a certain way. I mean, not that I'm not saying all texts in all languages are written in the same way. That's not the argument I'm making. But the metacognitive skills, or the cognitive skills that are involved in reading are similar, right? So if you are a good reader in one language, you can become a good reader in another language as well. So as a teacher of English, if you want to help learners become better readers of English, if their mother tongue medium, if they've learned reading in their mother tongues, which are not English, you can actually help them transfer those skills adeptly, right? So I think you should tap into their ability to read texts in their own languages. They'll find it much easier to read in English. Right? I've observed, this is just an aside, I've observed that people who have learned, who have gone through mother tongue medium education, they're quite good at reading. They're quite good at picking up those skills, especially if there is motivation and exposure, like Krashen would say. Right? I'm not an adherent of Krashen, but this idea is very good. He says if there is sufficient motivation and there is sufficient exposure, people can learn easily, right? Languages, right? So I think there is that ability to transfer, that those abilities can be transferred, especially in the context of reading. Yeah, there was another question you highlighted. Yeah, reading is the, sorry, I missed it. Reading is the only skill that is private, personal, and leads us to contemplate. Listening, speaking, and writing involve others and hence the public. Yeah, of course. Listening involves others in the sense that there is a speaker who you're listening to. In that sense, there's a writer who has written something and you're reading that person. So in that sense, reading and listening can both be private, in the sense that, you don't have to share the way in which you listen or the way in which you read with anybody else. It's private in that sense. Writing and speaking, writing can also be private in the sense you're writing in the confines of your privacy, both in terms of physical space, but I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to the fact that you're writing in a certain way based on your thinking or your universe, right? And so in that sense, writing is also private. Thanks for that question. Speaking is, in my opinion, an outlier in that sense, and the odd person out, right? So both, all listening, writing, and reading are very private in many ways. But speaking necessitates the existence of another person, right? So in that sense, speaking is the skill which requires the greatest empathy and immediate empathy. So you have a listener, you have that person right next to you, you need to empathize, right? In that sense, you're right that speaking is somewhat public, but I think when you read, even though you're reading somebody else's opinion and you're reading about somebody else, it helps you become a more empathetic, more concerned, more humane speaker. So thank you for that question, Srinivas.
We have another question from Dr. Ramani.
Ramani sir, yes. Is it not possible for one to present one's views and ideas in better, more creative ways than the rhetorical structures and patterns you get exposed to through your reading? I mean, I'm not suggesting that when you read and you, when I say that you read and you become a better speaker or a better listener or a writer, I'm not at all suggesting that you imitate merely what you're reading. I'm absolutely not suggesting that. The rhetorical structures and patterns there are in reading, and when you write for particular context, particular audiences, for example, you write a novel, you write in a certain way, you write a short story, you write in a certain way, you write an academic text, you write in a certain way, and so on. Those are superficial aspects. I'm not talking about the rhetorical devices or the structures of the sentences or the patterns in that sense, which are genre-related aspects. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the ability to suit, the ability to tailor your language to the context that you need to get into, right? In that sense, I'm saying I'm not referring to straight jacket. Okay, this is X plus Y, so I put that X plus Y when you're speaking. No, not in that sense, but more in the sense of the ability to use language in a more nimble or in a more moldable fashion. In that sense, I mean that when you read more broadly and more deeply, you can become a better speaker in that sense. Thank you, sir, for the question. Yeah. Virya says, could you suggest some strategies to remember what we read? Intuitively, I can say that, the more you read, the more you remember. The strategies to remember what you read, I think you need to become more interested in what you're reading. If you're interested in what you're reading and you are able to sustain that interest in what you're reading, you will remember. The strategies, I am no magician to give you strategies. I think it has much to do with the interests that you yourself have developed. For example, if I'm reading about music, right? If I'm reading about music, I'm interested in music. But I can't probably read about a theory of music, for example, as much as I read about the performance of somebody or the nuances of a performance of somebody, right? So I think each one has their own interest and their own broad preferences. I think you tend to remember those much more than so I'm not sure I can give you I don't have a bag of mnemonic skills, for example, to dole out to you and say, okay, these are the strategies you can use. But I think if you read often and if you read more, I think as a reader itself, you intuitively develop certain strategies, which I think we have to go meta as individuals and individual readers to make sense of. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for answering the question, sir. Let us take the final question.
Yeah.
From Kavita. Sir, motivating the learners to read has become a great challenging task. Could you suggest the ways by relating reading with other skills?
Yeah. See, what I did throughout this presentation actually was to give you ways in which you can persuade anybody who's not thinking that reading is important to understand that reading is actually crucial, right? So that's one side of the story. Motivating learners to read, I think some of our habits are to blame. For example, if I ask all my friends who like me are students of literature, we tend to become fairly judgmental, right? We become judgmental. I mean, so if I ask you, if I ask this audience of 150 people, between Chetan Bhagat and Amitav Ghosh, who do you think? We will not bat an eyelid. We'll say, obviously, Amitav Ghosh is way better. Chetan Bhagat is crass. It's not literature, right? So we become judgmental. That tendency to become judgmental is fine. I mean, we have our reasons. We know why Chetan Bhagat may not be as great a writer as this master of an Amitav Ghosh. But then the point I'm trying to make is why I'm making this point is because we tend to become judgmental, we tend to associate certain texts as elite, capable, useful texts to read, and we look down upon other texts as not so good enough, and so on, right? So that's an important consideration to take into take when we are answering the question about motivating learners to read, right? Every learner is at a certain stage or at a certain range of reading, right? If we say no, this is not for your age, this is not for your level, or this is not the kind of reading you should do, for example, we are limiting the opportunities for them to read. We are demotivating them from reading, right? So the first and foremost thing that we must remember as teachers of English is all reading is reading. All reading is reading. So we should not straitjacket them into thinking that, okay, this is the kind of reading you should do because you are age 8, you're age 16, you're age 24. Comics, no. Comics are for small kids. Those kinds of things we must avoid. And say, read whatever you get, read, right? If they read texts, or a variety of texts are offered, if they read texts which they are capable of reading, which they are interested in reading, I am sure that they will be motivated enough to read. So the motivation for reading, one is of course to tell them that reading is important, reading is crucial, blah, blah, blah. But then the other thing is to kindle their love for reading by reading whatever they read. They develop their own taste in reading. That's fine. That's okay. I think we must let that happen. That is crucial. That's the most important thing. I mean, as teachers of English, we are very, very opinionated. We must fight that tendency. I'm not making a judgment, but I think there is among us there's this prejudice against certain kinds of texts, certain kinds of reading. If we keep that aside, we just like in Tamil they say palla kadiche. We forgive the readers. Okay, we give them that option and say, okay, fine, you read something, no problem. If you let that happen, I think motivation will follow.
Thank you a lot, sir. Thank you a lot for your patience and interest in answering all the questions. Only a good leader becomes a good leader. The key takeaways from the speaker today in the last session are: reading gives us fresh perspectives. It triggers new ways to thinking in life. Reading is a receptive skill that turns productive as productive. We read to, and the speaker also, insisted on to read to let the mind work. Reading triggers, it inspires, it offers experiences, it enhances, it improves the brain functioning, and it also enhances all the other faculties. Thank you for a vibrant session, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.